Joe in South Carolina, you are on the line with Jimmy and Matt.
How's it going, guys? Sorry you needed a deep breath.
I do.
What a weird way to start. It's like
maybe I poisoned the well.
Oh, an arch nemesis called into.
Yeah, but Joe, you know what?
Joe?
I regret saying that. I almost did. I poisoned the well a little bit. So let's clear it of that. That's not. It was more me expressing as a human. I will tell you why I needed a deep breath or why I said it if you like, Joe, and then you can give yours or you can just jump into yours.
Go for it.
Joe, it says here you're calling in to challenge Matt's criteria for evidence. And I was just talking to the last caller about what the most honest callers look like. And it seems to me interesting that the people who call in with, if their answer is correct, the biggest answer to the biggest question in the world needs us to skew our methods of the ways we currently accept evidence, that we need to change that whole process to be able to accept. Now, listen, what I'm saying does not disqualify it as still being possible, but it seems very interesting to me that when it comes to medicine, when it comes to is the oven hot, when it comes to things big and small, that I hope all accept is true, that they use a certain standard of evidence. And then when we get to this biggest question of the thing that should have the biggest footprint, and B, I feel, based on what I've been told, the easiest to prove, the problem isn't that it can't meet that burden. The problem is the fact how we evaluate that burden of proof in the first place. So, Joe, I apologize for poisoning the well at the beginning and presetting the tone. I shouldn't have done that. That was what was behind those words. If you now want to present your argument, you may.
Okay, no, I was laughing because I saw the humor and I assumed there might be a different note beside my name or something because I've called in a few times. But no, so yeah, no, my contention is just that I think that you guys, yeah, that you have a different standard of evidence for what could qualify to support the view of God than you would have for anything else. And
Nope.
and I learned something from Matt and Paulogia the last time I called. I've learned things from Justin, and so I'm not unteachable, but I do think that you're wrong or that I need to be corrected. Okay.
So you're saying you're calling in to challenge my criteria for evidence. I'm going to bet that you can't state what my criteria evidence is, especially if you think I have a different criteria for a God claim than I do for any other claim. I have the same standard of evidence for every claim that is about an empirical fact, something that is in fact true. There's a different thing when you start talking about, if you tell me you're left-handed, I have no way of verifying whether you're really left-handed or not. Even if I throw a ball at you and you catch it with your left hand, you could be ambidextrous, you could have trained for that, who knows? And it doesn't matter because if you tell me you're left-handed, I'm going to treat you and act as if you're left-handed. And so that sort of claim is, my acceptance of it is commensurate with the available evidence, which is that I'm aware people are left-handed. I evaluate whether or not you're likely to be telling the truth, et cetera. And so there's a bulk of evidence out in the reality that already supports the claim that you can be left-handed, but I will never know whether or not you are left-handed. And so the reason I mention that is, to whatever extent there may be different standards of evidence, it is because there are already a mountain of facts consistent with a claim, like I just got a new puppy last night. I did not. But if somebody made that claim, I know there are puppies. I know people get them as pets, blah, blah, blah. If somebody says, I just got a pet dinosaur last night, I have to ask more questions because there's not a bunch of evidence that suggests that's possible. And so what is it that you think about my standards for evidence that is somehow different for a God claim?
So I think a couple of callers ago, the gentleman that called in about the paranormal thing, I don't agree with him that was anything, but you guys said, hypothetically, let's just give you your argument that this was a real video. You said, even if you had caught something like that on videotape, that would not count as evidence. And so I'm trying to figure out
It would
what
not
in the
count as it
world
would not count as
would count as
evidence.
evidence.
It was not count as evidence that the source was in fact supernatural. It would be evidence that something occurred. The source of that, we still don't know, and nothing about the observation indicates that it is in fact supernatural when everything we're seeing is natural or unexplained. How can you determine that a video is evidence for the supernatural when nobody's even demonstrated that the supernatural is a possible candidate explanation for it?
Joe, I would like to note before you answer that question, I actually clarified, maybe this volume got thing, but when he said the evidence thing, I actually clarified it was evidence for the thing moving on the wall, not for the suit. So a video that we have confirmed is not a dramatized video of something moving on the wall is in fact evidence that something moved on the wall. It is not more than that.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Yeah,
Sorry
but I guess I have heard this. Yeah. Go ahead.
Let's Matt. Do you want to re-ask? I have a different version of a similar question.
I want Joe to get to. I'm still trying to figure out what's wrong with my standards of evidence.
Joe, actually, I think the easiest way you could demonstrate that to him. Could you name one thing Matt believes in that you believe there is the adequate evidence for God using the same methods by which he believes in that other thing? Do you know what I'm saying? He uses a standard of his current standard, leads him to accept X, and that same standard would be sufficient to believe in God. If you could answer what X is.
Yeah, so X would be logic. There's no way that Matt or you can prove logic exists.
Logic doesn't exist.
Circularly using logic.
Logic doesn't exist.
But we all know logic.
Logic does not exist. Were you just getting ready to say we all know logic exists? Do you not understand that concepts may not in fact exist? Other than so there's a distinction between whether or not we have a concept of a thing and whether or not the thing exists as a thing qua thing. Okay? So logic is not a thing that exists for which there is evidence. Logic is our attempts to process statements reasonably, but it's not a thing that exists.
Joe, do you believe Krishna exists?
No, I do not. But back to the logic. I think that was a clever way.
Hey, I just want to quick clarify why I asked that, and then you can do your thing. I promise.
If I can't hardly say anything, I'm just going to stop wasting my time.
Joe,
okay,
all I was
go
going
the fuck
to
away then.
Joe, all I was going to do was tell you why I asked that question, and it was going to guide you in a better direction. Joe, listen, I'm not meaning this condescendingly. We are better at helping you make your point than any average caller is going to be. Maybe you would be the exception. But Joe, the question I asked, if you believe Krishna exists, you just said no. My follow-up was going to be, do you understand that the concept of Krishna exists? And does accepting the concept of Krishna mean you accept that Krishna itself exists? It was going to further clarify in a point that I thought might make it more accessible to you and would have put whatever point you were about to make on a much better path and set you up for success if you could meet the challenge.
Gotcha. I just didn't realize I had an advocate or whatever there in the studio. I thought I was making arguments on my own. So that's where I'm coming from.
Great. Now
okay,
you know.
So I understand what you're saying. The concept of Krishna exists.
Joe, my slight apologies. I want you to answer Jimmy's question. I'm just letting you know I'm going to bow out of this conversation because I think you're dishonest as fuck, and I want Jimmy to prove me wrong. So there's another advocate for you in that I hope I'm wrong, but I'm done.
Okay, so back to what I was saying to Matt is that yeah. So the reality of what logic describes, what the concept, the reality of the truth of the concept, cannot be proven apart from the circular reasoning of appealing to logic. And so I believe that Matt holds the logic. I believe that you hold the logic, but you can't substantiate that claim apart from a divine absolute.
We've already made distinct the difference between the concept of logic and logic itself. And so as far as its actual existence, if you are rooting your existence of God, we both accept that the concept of a God exists and that the fruits of those concepts of those gods even exist. However, unlike logic, logic conceptually is consistent with its results as long as the individual engaging in it is actually engaging in it. The fruits of God, if we're just talking about the reliability of the concept of God for the existence of God, the fruits of a God belief certainly do not do the same and create a lot of self-contradictory information. So even on the basis that we wanted to evaluate two things that you feel we have to be presuppositionalists about, even though, again, we are in the conceptual world, not the actual world, evaluating the usefulness of that goes out the door as well. But again, you've completely moved the goalpost from you believe God exists in the same way that you believe logic exists, after identifying that these are completely different because one is conceptual and one is literal. You've tried to move the goalpost anyway. I think this might be why Matt's thinking you might be here dishonestly.
Not only that, but we do, in fact, presuppose as an axiom logic. It cannot be demonstrated that logic is inviolate. It is assumed to be because it continues to demonstrate that it is. To pretend that the only way to justify that is through some sort of divinity is unjustified, and to equate the acceptance, the pragmatic acceptance of logic as reasonable and reliable with, oh, therefore it's reasonable to believe a God exists, is patently absurd. You're equating two things that are not remotely equivalent. And you started with, we can all agree that logic is real. No, we fucking can't. What we can agree is that you don't understand the difference between concepts and actuality, and that those two things are not the same, and that at no point ever have I suggested that logic is something that exists and is real and is in fact justifiably accepted as true and inviolate. In fact, I have repeatedly in every lecture about the subject pointed out that this is a pragmatic assumption that we make out of necessity, and it is true to the extent that it continues to demonstrate its reliability. And that's it. When your God can demonstrate its reliability at the rate that logical reasoning can, then your God will be just as believable as logic. And until that happens, it is not.
So do you have, Joe, a better justification than presuppositionalism? Because I fundamentally, clearly the difference would be that we aren't going to accept any presupposition that we have any choice but to accept. So because of the inconsistency of the results of presupposing a God, it's easy to say it's not a justified presupposition and that anything can be presupposed. Do you have anything better than the thing that if it doesn't matter how consistent it is, you could presuppose anything and then anything can become true? Do you have anything better than that for something that Matt believes in? That upon the same foundation, a belief in an actual God, not a concept of God, should be accepted?
Well, I just think that your threshold of evidence, if I may go back there, is it okay if I go back to the evidence question?
You can have one sentence on that if the following sentence answers my question.
Gotcha. No, I'm pretty philosophically inept, and so I'm not. I was mostly calling in to talk about evidence.
I get it. Are all presuppositions equal? Because you've basically said that our belief is based on presuppositionalism. And therefore, if it's acceptable for presuppositionalism in logic, it should therefore be acceptable with presuppositionalism that presumes God. Do you believe all presuppositionalism is equal to each other?
I have no idea.
Of course you do.
Do you agree that
Okay, so can I?
do you agree that logic is reliable?
I do.
Do you think you and I could each independently demonstrate multiple examples of logic being reliable?
Yes.
Do you think that you and I could each give multiple examples of God being more reliable than a coin toss?
I know that you cannot.
And I think that you
Um,
cannot. Please give me an example where we can verify independently, the same as we could with logic, God being more reliable than a coin toss.
okay. Are you willing to talk with me about evidence any longer, or are you not interested in that subject?
I
Isn't
just asked
that
you. I just asked you. I just fucking asked you. You said that you think we could both give examples of logic being reliable. And I asked if we could both do it for God, and you think I can't, and I also think you can't. And that's part of the problem, because if I give you a demonstration of logic being reliable, you can verify it, Jimmy can verify it, everybody on the planet can independently verify it. Can that be done for God?
Yes, but that's why I'm calling in about
No,
evidence,
no,
because
no,
I
no, no,
think
no.
no
You don't
matter
get to
what I
say yes,
present,
but
you
you
would
don't get
shut
to
it
say, well,
down
no,
and
stop,
say,
stop. When I ask you a
"Do you
fucking
guys
yes or no question,
appreciate
just say yes,
irony at
because
all?
then I'm going to do it. Then I'm going to do a follow up. And
Do you
right now you're
appreciate
going to
irony at
whine.
all? You
Now you're
called
going
me a
to. Now you're going to
liar, and
whine.
then
Now
you
you're going
said
to
you would
whine.
step
Now you're going
out,
to whine. Now you're
and now
going to
you're
whine.
stepped
Now
back
you're going
in.
to
So I'm
whine.
not
Now
the
you're going to
liar.
whine. Now you're
Matt's
going to
the liar."
whine. Now you're going to whine like a little shit. I'm going to let you speak, but I'm not going to let you take over the show. So when I say that you and I could both demonstrate the reliability of logic, we could do it, both do it, and we could do it to anybody, that is a particular standard of evidence met. The reliability of this method is met like that. I asked if we could do the same thing for God, and you said, yes, but, and then you tried to go down the hill. I want to make sure that we're clear, and that's why I'm interrupting you to get clarity before you get to give your example. But you are the absolute fucking worst at this, which is why I'd already shut this shit down before. So let's try this again. I'm going to unmute you. Are you saying that each of us can demonstrate the reliability of God in a way that each of us can confirm? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Cool. Please demonstrate God in a way that we can all confirm right now.
Okay, I will do that. Would you give me like 2 or 3 sentences to talk about?
No. I need you to do what the fuck you just said you can do. Because if you don't, and if you keep going back to, oh, you hung up and you ran away. See, this is why Joe runs away. Because Joe has a particular narrative. Joe, who admits that he's a complete buffoon when it comes to philosophy and epistemology, thinks he can call in to demonstrate a problem with my standards of evidence. And when I get to the point where my standards of evidence for logic, even though it's a presupposition, is that logic demonstrates its reliability consistently. The only thing that we're presupposing, which we don't need to, is that it cannot be violated. And it is a problem of contradiction where you would have to assume that it was true to prove that it wasn't true. And then you have nothing, you have no standard. So it's just a spot where you're stuck, just like any other paradoxical thing. But logical reasoning is something that we understand and can demonstrate. Aristotle and his merry band of logicians came up with 200, all possible 256 syllogistic forms. That's all there is. We know that's all there is, because in the same way that when you create a diagram of ones and zeros and what the possible outcomes are, when you do a truth table, there's only those 4 options. When you do a Punnett square for genetics, you can look at the options. We know that the options are in fact exhaustive. And so we can catalog all 256 syllogistic forms. And of those, we know that 16 of them are valid. And only those 16 If you put in true premises, always necessarily result in a true conclusion. There are 8 additional forms that are also valid in the circumstance where none of the components are an empty set. All of that. Some people's eyes glazed over. Matt's talking about logic and syllogisms and forms like this. Here's the thing. You can take everything I said and give it to every person who teaches logic, who studies logic, and they will all look at it and say, yep, that's right. There's no disagreement on this. The 8 disputed forms are recognized as disputed as to whether or not the empty set. But once you catalog it that way and say, ooh, is this invalid an empty set? That is a point of dispute, but not whether or not they're disputed. You asked the 16, is Barbara a valid syllogistic form? Every single person who studies logic, teaches logic, whatever, they will all agree. You cannot get that kind of agreement with your God or anybody else's God. You cannot get agreement on the definition or categorization of that God. You cannot get agreement on what it can do. You cannot get agreement on whether or not it cares who I sleep with or what I ate or what I said or what I thought. So don't come in here and pretend when I've backed you into a logical corner that your God has ever been demonstrated to be more reliable than a coin toss. And then when I give you the opportunity to prove me wrong, you want to backtrack to talk about something else and then hang up when I won't let you. Bring your A game. I ain't the other show. You ain't getting on here unless you do what you say you're going to do. Thanks, Joe.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Snow, executive producer of The Line, and I only became a woodworker for the puns. That's not important. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so on our Patreon or as a channel member, and you can actually support specific shows and specific hosts in special tiers on those. Check those options out. Also, you can leave a super thanks and get a little highlighted deal. But if all else fails, you can always you can subscribe and leave a comment. Now, here are some suggestions because I don't care about the algorithm. I am the algorithm. Bye.